Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can loosen, where mysteries soften at the edges, and where knowledge becomes a gentle companion for the night. Tonight, we'll wander through a question that has followed humanity like a curious shadow. Why do some objects appear to belong to a different time than the one in which they were found? This story is called Future's Footprint, Unraveling Unexplained Anachronisms. But before you settle in, if you find these calm explorations comforting, you're always welcome to like this video and subscribe. And if you feel like sharing, I would love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's something peaceful, seeing all the moments stitched together from every corner of Earth. When you're ready, you can let the lights fade a little, let your shoulders relax, perhaps listen to the soft hum of a fan, and join me as we begin tonight's quiet walk into the strange places where time seems to bend. And if your mind drifts, let it drift. The story will stay right here. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in a museum long after closing hours. The crowds have gone home, the hallways are empty, and every sound feels softened, as though wrapped in a warm blanket of stillness. The marble floors hold a faint echo of the day, a whisper of footsteps and conversations that have already slipped into memory. Ahead of you, glass cases glow faintly under dim security lights. Their reflections shimmer along the floor like small pools of moonlight. This is a place where time slows, where the past seems close enough to touch. As you walk, you pass familiar artifacts, clay pots, bronze tools, fragments of ancient walls. They sit in their cases like quiet elders, content to rest in the certainty of their own history. But then you notice something else, a case that feels slightly out of place. Inside it rests a clay jar with a copper cylinder tucked neatly inside, along with an iron rod. People call it the Baghdad Battery, though we aren't sure it was a battery at all. Nearby, another case holds a lump of corroded bronze from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It looks like nothing more than sea-worn metal, but inside it, hidden from view for centuries, are gears so delicately made that even modern watchmakers pause to admire them. Farther along, in another case, lies a section of an ancient map that appears to know coastlines long before anyone had supposedly drawn them. These objects feel like strangers at a gathering of old friends. They do not quite belong to the time they appear in, and that dissonance creates a gentle tug in the imagination. It's the kind of tug that makes people whisper about time travelers, forgotten civilizations, or messages from a future that somehow slipped backward into the past. They are the museum's quiet riddles. In a real museum, we might pass these cases without a second thought. But in this quiet, dreamlike hall, they seem to lean toward us, almost as if they're trying to tell us something. Not in loud declarations, these objects are far too polite for that, but in small suggestions, a question carved into the way they appear, a puzzle resting patiently in their materials. Anachronisms. The word sounds heavier than the concept, but in truth, the idea is simple. An anachronism is anything, an object, an idea, a style, that appears in a time where it doesn't seem to belong, like finding a modern wristwatch in a story about ancient Rome, or hearing a jazz melody in a film set in the Middle Ages. Sometimes these mismatches are accidents made by artists or storytellers. Sometimes there are additions made on purpose to help us connect the old world with the new one. But occasionally, just occasionally, they seem to appear in our actual historical record. That is when they become far more than curiosities. They become questions. Why would a clay jar from 2,000 years ago look so much like a device that could create a tiny spark? Why would gears from an age of simple tools suddenly appear with the precision of a clockmaker centuries ahead of his time? Why does an old map seem to know the edges of a continent long before explorers recorded them? These are the questions that draw us here tonight, not because they promise answers, but because they invite wonder. They invite the kind of gentle speculation that doesn't break the calm of the night, but enriches it. As you walk further into this imaginary museum, you might wonder whether we are meant to solve these puzzles or simply sit with them. Some people believe that such artifacts are proof of visitors from the future. Others insist they are the echoes of lost knowledge, skills passed through hands now long forgotten. And many more suggest that the real story is more ordinary, more human, but no less beautiful. Misinterpretations, coincidences, or the natural brilliance of ancient minds exploring the world with the tools they had. Whatever the explanation, these objects stand together like a small, quiet choir, singing a single, haunting note. We do not yet know everything about our own past, and maybe we never will. But that mystery is part of the reason history feels alive. The gaps allow us to dream. They remind us that time is not always as straightforward as the clocks on our walls suggest. For tonight, we won't rush to decide what these objects are. We will simply look at them one by one, as if we were wandering between constellations in a dark sky. Each artifact a star, each one holding a story older than the room it rests in. And perhaps, somewhere between the dim museum lights and the quiet hum of your own thoughts, a question will rise gently. What if time is not a strict line, but a soft landscape where things sometimes appear where we don't expect them? Where we go from here will unfold slowly, like turning the fragile pages of an ancient manuscript. For now, just breathe and let the weight of the day loosen. The museum is open and the night is long. When you linger in the quiet corridors of our imagined museum a little longer, something gentle begins to unfold. The more you look, the more you notice that anachronisms aren't always dramatic or spectacular. Sometimes they are subtle, like a faint echo in a room you thought was completely silent. And in many ways, these soft echoes are the most fascinating. They reveal just how finely tuned our sense of time truly is. How quickly we notice when something doesn't belong, even if we cannot explain why. Imagine yourself standing before a painting, one that shows an ancient banquet, lit by torches and surrounded by stone pillars. At first glance, everything appears perfectly in place. The robes, the cups, the bowls, even the gestures of the people feel rooted in their time. But then your eyes land on one detail. A figure in the background holding a small object that looks suspiciously like a modern fork. It's nothing more than a glimpse, a moment. Yet it jolts your sense of order. Something in the brain whispers, that shouldn't be there, long before you consciously understand why. Humans are remarkably sensitive to these little mismatches. Our minds keep quiet track of the stories we know, when certain materials were invented, when particular shapes or gestures became common, when certain tools entered everyday life. We might not know exact dates, but we feel the rhythm of history the way we feel the rhythm of a song. And when a note slips out of place, even a simple one, we hear it. Anachronisms in art are often harmless and even charming. Filmmakers sometimes leave modern objects in historical scenes by accident, and audiences delight in spotting them. A Roman soldier wearing a wristwatch, a medieval queen with a zipper stitched into her gown, a knight in armour walking past a fire extinguisher left on set. These are accidents of production, tiny hiccups in an otherwise faithful illusion. They remind us that the stories we tell about the past are still made by people living in the present, surrounded by objects of their own time. But anachronisms can also be intentional. Directors might choose a modern song for a period film to bridge the emotional distance between then and now. Painters from earlier centuries sometimes included animals, flowers, or clothing styles that belonged to their own era rather than the one they were depicting. Writers plant references, not out of error, but out of artistic freedom. These choices are deliberate invitations, ways of saying, this story may be old, but it still speaks to you today. In this sense, anachronisms serve as doorways, allowing the past and present to brush gently against each other without breaking the spell. Yet, the most intriguing anachronisms, the ones that tug at our curiosity with quiet persistence, are the ones that appear in the historical record itself. These are not slips of the brush or accidents of film sets. They are objects, ideas or carvings that seem genuinely out of their place in time. They belong to no artist's imagination and cannot be explained by stylistic choices. Instead, they sit quietly in museum cases or archaeological reports, leaving researchers to wonder whether they are misunderstood clues or simply reflections of how little we truly know. Think of a small figurine carved from stone, found deep beneath layers of sediment. If that figurine resembles a creature from a much later period, the mind stirs. How did it get there? Was it dropped by accident, carried by flowing earth, or misdated by our methods? Or imagine uncovering a metal object in a layer of ground that seems far older than the object's style. Is the soil disturbed? Was the object buried later? Or is the shape not what we assume it is to begin with? These questions aren't accusations. They're invitations to look carefully, patiently, and without jumping to conclusions. Archaeologists, in their quiet and methodical way, approach anachronisms differently from storytellers. They focus on context, not only the object itself, but the company it keeps. If a piece of pottery lies beside other fragments that clearly belong to a particular century, that shared presence becomes a gentle suggestion about its age. If an object sits much deeper in the earth, near charcoal, bones, or pollen, we can date with reasonable certainty. That two layers clues upon clues. Rather than relying on dramatic leaps, archaeologists piece together the timeline in the same way one might read faded handwriting in an old journal. Slowly, carefully, letting meaning surface in its own time. And yet, even with careful methods, the Earth sometimes plays tricks on us. Human activity can disturb layers, mixing old soil with new. Rivers shift, carrying objects from distant places. Earthquakes tilt and fold layers like pages caught by the wind. In such moments, an object may appear older or younger than it truly is, simply because the ground around it has moved. When this happens, the mind can easily leap to the extraordinary. But the real explanation is often gentler. Natural forces rearranging the quiet archive beneath our feet. Still, the allure of something out of time remains powerful. As you stroll through this imagined museum hall, you might sense why. Anachronisms touch a delicate part of the human mind, the place where curiosity meets imagination. They ask us to wonder without demanding an answer, to linger in possibilities without needing certainty. They remind us that history is not a fixed, cold ledger, but a living, breathing landscape shaped by memory, discovery, and the quiet shifting of time. A small mismatch in a timeline can feel like a secret window. Part of you might imagine a traveller stepping out of some distant century, leaving behind an object they forgot to pick up. Part of you might imagine ancient artisans who knew far more than we assume, and part of you might understand that these mysteries are as much about the present, our expectations, our stories, our longing for connection, as they are about the past itself. For now, as we continue through this soft-lit museum, we don't need to settle anything. We only need to notice these small moments where the story of time feels a little loose at the seams. These are gentle places where wonder gathers, where history breathes a little differently, and where the imagination can stretch its quiet wings. As you continue down the dim hallway of our imagined museum, the air feels a little cooler, almost as if the past is drawing closer with each step. The soft glow from the display cases guides your path, and you realise that you've reached a section of the museum that feels slightly different from the rest. The artefacts here look as though they have gathered from many distant corners of time, each one carrying a quiet question in its shape. They sit together not because they belong to the same era, but because they spark the same gentle wonder. These are the objects people sometimes call out-of-place artifacts, pieces of history that seem to have wandered into the wrong chapter. The phrase out-of-place artifact can sound dramatic, like something pulled from an adventure novel, but the idea is simple enough. Imagine sorting books on a shelf by year, each one resting neatly in order. Now imagine finding a glossy modern magazine nestled between two ancient leather-bound volumes. It doesn't matter if the magazine is extraordinary, it would still feel strange just by being there. Many of the objects in this quiet corner of the museum create that same feeling. They don't shout for attention, but they sit just slightly off-key, the way one note in a familiar melody might sound a touch too bright. One of the display cases holds a lump of metal, preserved under soft light. It looks rough, as though it has weathered centuries of sand and water. But peeking through the corrosion are what seem to be delicate shapes, straight lines, edges meeting at angles, traces of human craftsmanship. You might not even know what it is, but the shape plants a question in your mind. Why does it look like it does? Why does it feel so modern in places? Such questions follow many objects in this domain of wrong time, wrong place, and this is what makes them so captivating. But before diving into individual cases later on, it helps to pause here and understand how these wandering objects became such compelling figures in human storytelling. They tend to appear in books and documentaries that blend mystery with speculation. They often serve as the seeds of theories about ancient aliens, forgotten civilizations, or time travelers leaving crumbs across the centuries. These stories tap into our love for the extraordinary. After all, if a small device centuries ahead of its time were discovered buried under ancient stone, how could we not wonder? Yet our curiosity is paired with an equally powerful sense of caution. Human history is intricate, layered, and sometimes messy. The ground beneath us does not always obey tidy chronological order. Earthquakes fold rock-like paper, rivers carry objects for miles, and human hands bury things where they do not belong. Lost hikers drop modern tools in ruins. Ancient children play with old relics that were already antiques in their time. Even archaeologists, careful as they try to be, sometimes find disturbances in the soil that turn out to be caused by animals, roots, or the simple shifting of ground over centuries. All these things create small illusions, momentary flickers that make an object appear older or younger than it truly is. But here, in this museum, we're not trying to dismiss anything. We are simply letting each object rest in our attention long enough to reveal its layers. When looking at out-of-place artifacts, there are a few quiet questions that archaeologists carry like lanterns. They don't use them to shine judgment, but to illuminate possibilities. The first question is about context. Where was the object found? What surrounded it? Was it lying alone, or nestled among other items clearly tied to a particular era? Archaeologists often say that context is even more valuable than the object itself, because it tells a story that the artifact alone cannot speak. The second question is about pathways. How might this object have arrived there? Could it have been carried by water, moved by soil, dropped by someone from a later period, or inherited from a much older relative? The Earth is never still. In the span of centuries, it acts like a gentle hand rearranging pieces on a vast table. Sometimes it sets things in places that look almost intentional, even though no intention was involved. And then there is the question of interpretation. When we look at an object, we see it through the lens of our present. A person today might see a battery where an ancient artisan saw a container for oils or incense. A carving that looks like a light bulb to us might have represented a plant or a mythological symbol for the people who made it. The mind naturally fills gaps with what it knows. This isn't a flaw. It's a sign of how deeply human imagination runs. But it means that our first impression of an object is not necessarily the final truth. Now, as you stand in front of these cases, take a moment to picture the way these artifacts are often presented in dramatic shows. The camera zooms in, a narrator speaks in a deep voice, and the object is described as something that should not exist. But in the soft light of the museum tonight, stripped of theatrics, each object feels quieter, almost introspective. These are not impossible objects. They are simply puzzles waiting for patience rather than excitement, And perhaps that is what makes this corner of the museum so calming. You're not asked to believe or disbelieve anything. You're not asked to take sides in debates. You're simply invited to look, to imagine, and to let your thoughts settle like dust in still air. Each artifact is a small door, not to a grand conspiracy, but to a moment in time where someone, an artisan, a traveller, a child, held it in their hands. That person lived a life as real as yours. They walked on ground that might now be buried beneath thousands of years of sediment. They worried, hoped, dreamed. They shaped something with intention, even if we no longer know what that intention was. Even the mysterious objects that have been debunked still hold a kind of warmth. A hoax is, at the end of the day, a human story. Someone carving a small riddle into stone, someone burying it with a smile, someone finding it years later and feeling a spark of curiosity. That spark is worth acknowledging, even when the story itself unravels with closer inspection. As you linger here, you begin to understand that out-of-place artifacts are less about challenging the laws of time and more about challenging our assumptions. They remind us that history is not a polished timeline but a patchwork quilt woven from memory, loss, accident, and discovery. When an object seems out of time, it is an opportunity, not to rewrite the past, but to re-examine how we listen to it. If you follow the quiet hallway a little farther, the air seems to grow warmer, as if you were stepping toward a place where fire once lived. The cases here hold clay, metal, and small objects that look simple at first glance, but carry with them centuries of stories. One display in particular often catches visitors by surprise. It's a modest clay jar, nothing ornate, nothing gilded, nothing decorated with the swirling patterns that ancient artisans loved. It sits humbly in the glass, as though it expects to be overlooked, and yet this quiet cylinder of earth and metal is one of the most frequently debated objects in conversations about anachronisms. People call it the Baghdad Battery. The jar itself is easy to imagine: a simple clay pot, a copper cylinder curled neatly inside, and an iron rod rising from the centre like a stem. When someone first sees it, they might tilt their head, feeling the faint suggestion of something familiar. It looks similar in shape to the cells and small battery components we see in modern tools or toys. The resemblance is subtle, but enough to spark a question that has echoed for decades. Could this have been a real ancient power source? Stories grew quickly around that idea. Some imagined that ancient artisans knew how to create gentle bursts of electricity. Others pictured secret workshops where gold was electroplated with techniques far ahead of their time. It is natural to feel drawn to these explanations. When we see something that resembles a familiar device, our minds fill in the rest. But here, in the soft light of our quiet museum, we can take a slower path. Instead of jumping to conclusions, we can let the object breathe, letting its possibilities unfold gently, like the petals of a flower opening in slow motion. What would it mean for this clay jar to be a battery? In modern terms, a basic battery needs 3 simple elements: 2 different metals and a liquid that can carry electric charge. Copper and iron, the materials in the jar, can indeed serve as 2 parts of such a system. And if the jar had been filled with vinegar or some other mild acidic liquid, it could, in theory, produce a very small spark. Not enough to power anything grand, not enough to light a lamp or run a machine, but enough to create a faint tingle, a whisper of electricity that might surprise someone touching the terminals. Still, imagining this ancient jar producing a spark is not the same as proving it did. Archaeologists have found no objects from that time and place that bear the unmistakable marks of electric plating. There are no wires, no repeated sets of similar jars, no workbenches showing standardized production of such devices. It would be strange to invent an electrical tool without leaving any sign of what it was used for. That doesn't mean the idea is impossible. It simply means that the evidence is gentle, incomplete, and open to interpretation. One of the most thoughtful explanations is also one of the simplest. The jar may have held sacred liquids or scrolls, used for healing rituals or ceremonial purposes. In this view, the copper cylinder might have been a container to protect something fragile, while the iron rod could have served as a stopper. Ancient civilizations often designed intricate containers for spiritual practices, vessels for blessings, curses, or prayers. If that was the purpose of this jar, the modern comparison to a battery becomes nothing more than a coincidence, a reflection of our habit of seeing familiar shapes in unfamiliar places. But even if the Baghdad Battery wasn't a battery at all, it performs its own kind of magic. It teaches us how easy it is for the mind to make leaps between the past and the present. When we see something that echoes our own technology, our imaginations rush to fill in the gaps. Sometimes we see patterns because we long for them. Other times we see them because humans across centuries have tended to reuse efficient shapes without ever meeting one another. And it is not alone in this trick of reflection. Many ancient objects invite similar misunderstandings. Think of the carving at the Temple of Dendera, where a long curved shape on the wall is sometimes said to resemble a modern light bulb. In the glow of torchlight, or now with photographs taken under electric beams, its shape does have a silhouette that reminds us of glass and filament. But most Egyptologists see it differently. They see a symbolic depiction of a sacred plant emerging from a lotus blossom, cradled by protective arms of divinity. What looks like a bulb to a modern viewer might have looked like a spiritual metaphor to an ancient one. Or consider the small wooden figure known as the sakura bird. Its wings are straight, its tail slightly angled, and to some modern eyes it resembles the model of a glider. Could it have flown? Perhaps gently, like a child's toy tossed in the air. But that alone does not make it a blueprint for an aircraft. For ancient Egyptians, birds were powerful symbols tied to the soul, freedom, and the afterlife. The figure may have been an offering, a charm meant to carry wishes upward. These examples remind us that interpretation is a kind of mirror. It shows us as much about ourselves as it does about the object we're studying. We see batteries because we know batteries. We see light bulbs because they light our modern nights. We see gliders because human imagination is always eager to take flight. And in this way, each supposed anachronism becomes a conversation across time, shaped by both the maker's world and the viewer's. As you stand before the case holding the Baghdad Battery, you may notice how still it seems. It does not insist on any single story. It simply carries the weight of possibilities. Maybe it once held a sacred liquid used by a healer. Maybe it was part of a ritual now forgotten. Maybe someone crafted it with a purpose that made perfect sense in its time, even if the meaning has slipped away from ours. And yes, maybe it could make a small spark if used in the right way. Not a spark large enough to change the world, but enough to stir curiosity thousands of years later. In the end, this clay jar, humble, quiet, unassuming, teaches us something beautiful. Anachronisms do not always need to be solved. Some loom large because of what they tell us about ancient creativity. Others linger because of what they reveal about the stories we bring to the past. And often, the truth lies somewhere between the two, a blend of ingenuity, misunderstanding, and the soft erosion of time. As you leave behind the warm clay vessels and quiet metal pieces of the last gallery, the museum around you seems to shift in tone. The air becomes cooler again, touched with a faint scent of salt and old wood. The distant hum of ocean waves seems to echo through the hall, though you know you're still indoors. Ahead of you, another glass case waits under a soft circle of light. Inside it rests something that, at first glance, looks almost disappointingly ordinary. A corroded lump of bronze broken into fragments, rough as stone, and silent as the seafloor where it slept for centuries. Yet within this unassuming shape lies one of the most intricate puzzles ever lifted from the past, a device so sophisticated that when it was first studied, even experts could scarcely believe it belonged to the time from which it came. This is the Antikythera Mechanism. Imagine, for a moment, the sea that hid this object. The year was around the 1st century before the Common Era, and a large ship sailed near the island of Antikythera, carrying treasures from Greece toward Rome. Whether caught in a storm or pulled by strong currents, the ship sank, scattering statues, pottery, jewellery, and this strange device across the seabed. For nearly 2,000 years, it rested in darkness, wrapped in weed and encrusted with mineral deposits. Nothing about its appearance suggested it held any special secret. But one day in 1900, sponge divers descended into the clear Aegean waters and found the wreck. Among marble torsos and broken amphorae, they noticed a lump of bronze with faint traces of gears inside, though no one grasped the importance of the discovery at first. It was only later, when researchers carefully examined the fragments, that the true strangeness of the object began to surface. Within the damaged metal lay dozens of delicate gears, teeth carved with astonishing precision, arranged in patterns that suggested a complex system of movement. Some pieces showed inscriptions, others hinted at dials, hands, and tiny windows. The object was clearly meant to be turned by a handle, causing gears to rotate in a coordinated dance. But what was it for? At first, many scholars doubted their own eyes. Nothing else like this had ever been found from the ancient world. The craftsmanship resembled mechanical clocks that would not appear until more than 1,000 years later. How could something so advanced exist in an age when most machines were simple levers, pulleys, or water-driven tools? It felt like discovering a smartphone inside a medieval castle. Astonishing, confusing, and out of place. Yet the more carefully researchers studied the mechanism, the clearer its purpose became. And the truth, once it surfaced, was even more beautiful than the wildest guesses. The Antikythera Mechanism was a kind of ancient sky computer, a device built to predict the movements of the heavens. When a person turned its hand crank, a network of gears would rotate in harmony, mimicking the cycles of the sun and moon. One dial tracked the lunar phases, showing the waxing and waning light. Another predicted eclipses, marking them with symbols representing the shadows of Earth and Moon. Yet another displayed the long repeating cycles known to ancient astronomers, patterns the Greeks had studied for centuries. Some researchers believe the mechanism may even have shown the positions of planets, though that part is still debated gently among scholars. To describe this device without using technical symbols, imagine a tiny orchestra of wheels and teeth, each one turning at just the right rhythm to echo the sky. When you turned the crank, it was as though you were holding time itself in your hands. The mechanism transformed the slow dance of the cosmos into something you could watch unfold right before you. And this is where the idea of anachronism enters softly. For many years, people believed ancient Greece lacked the engineering tradition to create such a device. We imagine their machines as simple, their tools as rudimentary, their understanding of mechanisms as limited. But the Antikythera Mechanism is a gentle reminder that our assumptions about ancient minds often underestimate them. Just because few such devices survived does not mean they never existed. Bronze gears corrode quickly, wooden cases rot, many inventions leave no trace at all. Some historians now believe the mechanism may not have been alone. There could have been earlier versions, prototypes, or similar devices built by skilled artisans whose names and works were lost to time. In a world without mass production, even the most extraordinary tool might be made only once or twice, gifted to a wealthy patron or housed in a scholar's study. And when the owner passed away, or the device was damaged, nothing of it might remain for future generations, except perhaps this single fragment recovered from a shipwreck. Rather than proving time travelers or advanced civilizations, the Antikythera Mechanism reveals something equally extraordinary, but more grounded. Ancient people were capable of marvels we rarely imagine. Their world may have lacked electricity and engines, but it was rich with curiosity, observation, and a deep desire to understand the heavens. The night sky was their calendar, their compass, and their clock. They studied it with a devotion that shaped entire lifetimes, and in this device, we see the quiet culmination of that devotion. What makes the mechanism truly magical is not only its engineering, it is the silence surrounding it. We do not know the name of the person who designed it. We do not know the workshop where it was built. We do not know how many hands turned its crank, or how many eyes watched its dial spin. All we have are fragments, pieces of bronze scattered across a seabed, recorded by chance and preserved by accident. And so, as you stand before the glass case in our imagined museum, allow yourself to feel the quiet weight of that mystery. This device is not an intruder from the future. It is a survivor from a world more brilliant than we assumed. A world where curiosity shaped metal, where knowledge turned on tiny gears, and where time could be traced not just through shadows on sundials, but through the turning of a small bronze wheel. Perhaps the real miracle is not that the Antikythera Mechanism seems out of time, but that it reminds us how much of our own history lies hidden in the dark, waiting for someone someday to dive deep enough to find it again. The soft saltwater hush from the previous gallery seems to linger as you turn into the next silent room. Here, behind a wide pane of glass, rests a map, faded at the edges, its lines drawn in patient strokes of ink centuries old. It does not shimmer like a treasure. It does not boast bright colours or elaborate artistry. Yet, the moment you stand before it, you feel the unmistakable pull of something quietly extraordinary. This is the Piri Reis Map, created by an Ottoman admiral in the early 16th century, a fragment of a larger chart that once stretched across animal skin like a window onto the world. In museums, maps often feel still, like snapshots held down by pins. But this one has a different presence. Its coastlines bend and twist with the confidence of someone who believed they understood the shape of the world long before many explorers completed their voyages. And for that reason, this map has captured the imagination of countless people who whisper that perhaps it should not exist in the time from which it came. Perhaps it belongs to a later century, or perhaps, impossibly, to a future one. It helps first to picture the world as it was when Piri Reis was alive. The early 1500s were a time of oceanic uncertainty. Sailors navigated by stars, wind, and the instinct that grows from months at sea. Maps were often stitched together from half-remembered journeys and second-hand stories. Coastlines shifted from one chart to the next, reflecting the uneven spread of knowledge between ports, kingdoms, and empires. And yet, somehow, this map contains shapes, particularly along the coast of South America, that appear far more accurate than many charts produced decades later. The detail that draws the most attention and the most speculation is the southern part of the map. Some people believe it shows the northern edge of Antarctica, outlined centuries before that frozen continent was officially sighted by explorers. They point to long curves and land masses that seem to dip into cold waters. They argue that the continent's shape must have been known by someone far earlier than history allows. And from there, the mind leaps. Could this be evidence of a forgotten civilization with ships that travelled farther than we thought? Could it be a fragment left behind by ancient mariners whose secrets were lost? Or, whispered in more imaginative corners, could it hint at knowledge carried backward from a distant future? But before letting these possibilities drift too far, it's worth slowing down and exploring what scholars have found. The portion of the map that some interpret as Antarctica does not align perfectly with the actual outline of the icy continent. Instead, when viewed through the eyes of cartographers familiar with old navigational charts, the shape resembles a distorted continuation of South America, the kind of distortion that happens easily when mapping is done through fragments, or when longitude, which is the east to west measurement, remains difficult to calculate. In the 16th century, sailors could measure north-south distances more reliably by tracking the angle of stars above the horizon. East-west positioning, however, was a matter of guesswork until much later, when reliable sea clocks were invented. Without precise longitude, coastlines on maps often appear stretched or compressed, tilted or extended. A bay might become a peninsula. A peninsula might look like the edge of a vast unknown land. What seems like an entire continent at the bottom of the Piri Reis Map may actually be nothing more than the southern cone of South America, drawn with the uncertainty of its era. When scholars compared the shapes on the map to known coastlines, many found close similarities once those distortions were taken into account. But even with these careful explanations, the map remains astonishing in its own gentle way. Some sections of the Caribbean coastline appear surprisingly accurate, far more so than many maps produced by European explorers around the same time. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the margins of the map, explaining that he used a collection of older charts, sailor accounts, and earlier maps from various cultures. Among them, he mentioned one chart said to belong originally to Christopher Columbus, though this claim cannot be verified. What it tells us, however, is that map-making then was a patchwork art, a gathering of stories, drawings, and perhaps even rumours stitched together into a single representation of the world. This patchwork nature carries its own quiet poetry. A map like this one is not simply an image. It is a conversation between generations of explorers, each adding a line or a curve based on what they knew or thought they knew. Some coastlines reflect the precision of experience, others are shaped by imagination, and so the Piri Reis Map stands as a reminder that discovery is rarely a clean or linear process. It has always involved blending fact with half-understood glimpses of truth. When people look at this map today and see Antarctica, part of what they are seeing is our modern habit of overlaying familiar outlines onto unfamiliar shapes. The mind loves recognizable patterns. It rearranges what it sees to make sense of the world. This is not a mistake. It is a feature of how humans navigate both geography and time. When we gaze at an old map, we instinctively place modern boundaries and coastlines onto it, not because they were intentionally drawn there, but because they feel natural to us. And yet, while the map may not depict a continent that was unknown to its time, it still holds a kind of quiet magic. It shows how deeply humans have always been drawn to the edges of the known world. The act of placing ink on parchment, of marking the place where the land meets the sea, was an attempt to give shape to the mystery beyond the horizon. In that sense, the Piri Reis Map reflects not the future stepping into the past, but the past stretching toward the future, toward a more complete understanding of the world. Standing before the case in our museum, you might notice something else as well. Maps do not only show geography, they show dreams, they show curiosity, they show the places where knowledge ends and imagination begins. Whether or not the map truly contains something out of time, it contains the fingerprints of countless explorers, each adding a thread to the tapestry of human understanding, and that alone makes it one of the most quietly remarkable artifacts we have. Perhaps the real anachronism is not the map itself, but our assumption that people long ago saw the world with less clarity, less ambition, or less courage than we do today. The map whispers a gentler truth, that curiosity has always been part of human nature, and that even in centuries past, there were minds eager to draw the unknown into comprehension. As you leave the gallery of maps, the air in the museum seems to shift once more. The salt-tinged breeze of ocean voyages fades, replaced by something drier, almost dusty, as though the earth itself were whispering through the hall. You follow a gentle curve in the corridor, and soon the displays around you begin to glow with the colours of sand, stone, and ancient metals. These are not artefacts of oceans or shipwrecks. These are stories carved into earth, forged in fire and inked in scripts that no one alive can read. They are, each in their own way, soft puzzles that blur the line between what we know and what we hope to understand. The first case you encounter holds photographs rather than a single object. They show the Nazca Desert in Peru, a vast plain etched with immense lines. geometric shapes stretching for kilometres, and massive figures of animals that appear only when viewed from above. A stylized monkey with a spiralling tail, a hummingbird with wings outstretched, a spider drawn with a delicate hand across the desert floor. When these images were first spread across the world, they stirred a quiet astonishment. How could people living more than a millennium ago create designs so large they can only be recognised from the sky? Some suggested that the lines were messages or landing signals for beings who travelled through the heavens. Others wondered if the ancient Nazca people somehow took to the air themselves, using unknown devices or structures. But the soft truth, revealed slowly through decades of study, is that the lines are grounded in human ritual, not cosmic machinery. The Nazca people removed dark stones from the desert surface to reveal the lighter earth beneath, creating paths that may have been walked during ceremonies honouring water, fertility, and celestial cycles. From the ground, the figures do not look like pictures. They look like wide trails. The shapes are a gift to the sky, not because someone needed to see them from above, but because the world has always been full of offerings shaped by faith, imagination, and the longing to speak with forces larger than ourselves. As you move away from the desert images, the next display case shifts your attention toward the gleam of metal. Though softened by centuries of exposure, the iron pillar of Delhi stands here like a quiet giant. In reality, it rises more than 20 feet into the air, but this model shows only a section of it, enough to reveal the strange truth that fascinates so many. It has barely rusted in over 1600 years. At first, such resilience seems impossible. Iron is known to age quickly, to crumble under rain and air. And yet this pillar has stood through monsoons, heat, dust, and countless seasons. Some have called it evidence of forgotten technologies, imagining secret formulas or advanced methods hidden in the past. But the full story is gentler and more earthly. The iron used in the pillar contains a high amount of phosphorus, and the ancient smelting process left small particles within the metal that over time formed a protective film. Not a magical barrier nor a futuristic alloy, just an elegant combination of craftsmanship, environment, and natural chemistry working together. If you were to describe that thin protective layer in scientific terms, it would be something like a delicate skin created from the metal and its surroundings, a soft coating that slows rust the way calm water slows a drifting leaf. This pillar reminds us that sometimes what appears impossible is simply the result of human skill meeting the quiet cooperation of nature. Ancient artisans may not have known the microscopic details of what they were creating, but they understood their materials deeply through touch, experience, and tradition. And that knowledge shaped a monument that still stands today like a long, steady breath held across centuries. As you continue your walk, the glow in the room grows softer, almost like candlelight reflecting off old parchment. The next case holds not a sculpture or a piece of metal, but a book, a mysterious object that folds together illustration, script, and imagination into a riddle no one has ever solved. This is the Voynich manuscript, a codex filled with curling lines of text in a script that does not match any known language. Its pages contain drawings of plants no botanist can identify, diagrams of circular shapes that resemble constellations or astrological models, and scenes of figures bathing in pools connected by channels that defy obvious interpretation. Scholars have dated the parchment to the 15th century, yet the writing within remains completely opaque. Cryptographers, linguists, historians, mathematicians, and even modern code-breaking algorithms have tried to decipher it. But despite all efforts, no one has found a convincing explanation. To some, the manuscript feels like an encoded text waiting for the right key. To others, it is a work of elaborate nonsense, perhaps created as a curiosity or a hoax. But to many more, It is a reminder of just how much creativity existed in the past. Creativity that did not always follow the pairs we expect. There are no hidden equations in its pages, no symbols from the future disguised within the illustrations. Yet the book still feels like a visitor from a place just beyond our understanding. It is not an anachronism in the literal sense. It belongs squarely to its time period, and yet by resisting every attempt at understanding, it becomes a symbol of the limits of what we can know. Even today, with tools that can peer into structures smaller than atoms and instruments that can listen to the whisper of distant galaxies, we cannot unlock this one human voice from the past. These three wonders, the lines of a desert, the iron pillar that refuses to age, and the book that refuses to speak, each blur the boundaries of expectation in their own way. None of them require time travel to explain. None demand science far ahead of their era. And yet each one invites us to pause, to reconsider our assumptions about ancient minds, and to admit that the past still holds pockets of mystery that have not been filled. Standing here in this museum gallery, you begin to sense a pattern. Not a pattern of impossibility, but a pattern of human depth. These artifacts are not out of time, they are deeper in time than we usually look. They speak of cultures that saw the world with eyes different from ours, people who carved giant shapes into deserts for ceremonies we no longer fully understand, people who forged metal with care so fine that the earth itself protected it, people who wrote books in languages that now echo through silence. Perhaps the real miracle is that these objects have survived long enough for us to wonder at them. They have crossed oceans, deserts, weather, and centuries to rest here, quietly glowing in the dim museum light. And in their stillness, they remind us that every era has its own genius, its own mysteries, and its own ways of whispering to the future. As you step into the next quiet gallery, the atmosphere feels different once again. Not ancient, not oceanic, not desert-like, but almost like a study room where careful hands have worked for generations. Wooden cabinets line the walls, brushes, trowels, and lenses sit beneath soft light, as if waiting for the next pair of curious hands to pick them up. This room is devoted to understanding not any single artifact, but the quiet craft that helps us place each object in its rightful chapter of time. It is here, in this thoughtful space, that we explore how archaeologists determine when an object truly belongs to the era in which it was found, and when it might only seem out of place. Imagine the Earth as a layered cake, each layer laid down by centuries of wind, water, and life. The top layers hold the newest stories, while deeper layers hold tales that have been pressed down by time. Archaeologists rarely dig large chaotic holes. Instead, they peel back the earth gently, layer by layer, reading the soil the way one might read a delicate diary, whose pages cannot be separated too quickly. Each layer is a chapter, and each chapter contains fragments of lives lived long ago. Pottery, seeds, broken tools, bones, and sometimes something stranger. When an object is found in a layer that doesn't seem to match its style, people sometimes jump to conclusions. They say it's proof of advanced technology, or visitors from beyond. But archaeologists approach these mismatches with patience, because they know the Earth has its own ways of rearranging things. Soil can slump during heavy rains. Burrowing animals can pull objects from one layer to another. Even human construction can shuffle history without meaning to. A well-intentioned farmer digging a trench 100 years ago might leave behind a coin that later confuses a researcher. The ground can be as restless as the tide. It rearranges its treasures with a rhythm most of us never notice. Artifacts do not travel alone. This is the first principle archaeologists hold close. When they uncover an object, they do not only look at it, they look at everything around it. If a small metal figurine is found among pottery shards from a particular century, or alongside bones of animals known to have lived during that time, the surrounding company speaks softly about the object's age. Even if the object seems unusual, too refined, too simple, or too different, its neighbours act as gentle witnesses. They remind us that an object's age is not determined by how advanced it looks to modern eyes, but by the layers of earth that cradle it. Sometimes people ask whether archaeologists rely on formulas or equations to determine an artefact's age. The truth is that while scientific dating methods exist, they seldom require mathematical expressions to be understood. Radiocarbon dating, for example, often described with symbols and decay curves in textbooks, can be shared in gentler language. At its heart, it is simply the idea that tiny particles within once-living materials fade at a steady, predictable rhythm, rather like a candle burning down at a known speed. From the length of what remains, scientists can estimate how long ago the material last lived. No symbols are needed to feel the sense of time held within that fading. But even radiocarbon dating has its limitations. It works only on materials that were once alive: wood, seeds, bone, cloth. And it requires careful sampling because contamination from younger or older substances can nudge the results in misleading directions. This is why archaeologists place great value on cross-checking, using more than one method and comparing results with the story told by the surrounding soil layers. In the quiet of this gallery, it becomes clear that archaeology is not a hunt for dramatic revelations. It's more like listening to a soft-spoken storyteller whose tale comes not all at once, but slowly, in fragments. Each object, each layer of sediment, each pattern of wear, each tiny seed caught between stones, they all whisper clues, and the archaeologist kneeling in the dust, brush in hand, learns to listen. Still, mistakes and misinterpretations happen. That too is part of the story. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, several objects emerged that seemingly defied all logic. A hammer encased in stone, a metal sphere found deep underground, a tiny figurine discovered far below layers of sediment that predated humans. These finds captured imagination, sparking newspaper headlines and speculation. Some even claim these objects as evidence of ancient super-civilizations or modern travellers slipping through cracks in time. But as decades passed and scientific methods improved, most of these mysteries softened into simpler explanations. The hammer encased in stone turned out to be a modern tool surrounded by a type of mineral buildup that can occur surprisingly quickly under the right conditions, much like how stalactites grow faster in some caves than others. The strange metal sphere left from mining operations had been shaped not by ancient hands, but by industrial machinery. The figurine, once thought impossibly old, had likely slipped into the sediment through cracks or disturbances created by mining equipment. These revelations were not disappointments. They were reminders that the Earth is full of illusions. It folds and shifts, carries and hides, rearranges and reveals. And to truly understand an object's story, we must be willing to examine not just the artifact, but the entire stage upon which it rests. Perhaps what is most beautiful about archaeology is its refusal to rush. In a world that moves quickly, archaeology moves slowly. It invites humility. It teaches that even when an object looks as though it belongs to a different century, the truth often emerges only when we look patiently, with curiosity rather than urgency. It shows that the past is not a locked puzzle to be solved, but a vast tapestry woven from threads of soil, memory, and chance. Standing in this softly lit gallery, you realise that out-of-place artefacts are not always what they seem. Some are misunderstood, some are displaced by nature, some are illusions created by time's restless hand. But each one, whether fully explained or still mysterious, expands our understanding of how fragile and complex the story of history truly is. And perhaps that is the most important lesson this room offers. Even when the Earth rearranges its layers, even when the past feels confusing or uneven, the quiet discipline of listening, truly listening to the clues around us, allows the most accurate story to emerge. It doesn't require formulas or symbols, only patience, attention, and the willingness to accept that time is far more textured than we often assume. As you step out of the archaeologist's quiet workspace and into the next gallery of our imagined museum, the air softens again, becoming something in between reflection and recognition. This room feels different from the others, not filled with striking objects or towering artifacts, but instead with something more elusive, our interpretations. Shelves line the walls, not with relics of bronze or clay, but with sketches, notes, and gentle reminders of how easily the mind can reshape what it encounters. This space is about understanding something subtle yet powerful, that many anachronisms do not arise from the past, but from the stories we bring into the past. At the centre of the room stands a simple table. Resting on it are 3 items: a cloud-shaped sculpture, a cracked piece of ancient concrete, and a wooden spoon carved with delicate patterns. They don't belong to the same culture or time period. Instead, they represent 3 ways our human minds try to make sense of the unfamiliar: misinterpretation, loss of knowledge, and the quiet poetry of parallel invention. You begin with the cloud. It looks soft despite being carved from stone, its edges curled slightly inward as though holding a secret. As you run your eyes across its surface, the guide voice in your mind reminds you of something simple. The human brain is a pattern-making machine. It sees faces in the knots of wooden doors, animals in drifting clouds, and sometimes modern devices in ancient carvings. This habit is not a flaw. It is a survival instinct carried from ages when noticing a shape, whether predator or prey, could mean the difference between danger and safety. So when we look at an ancient carving with a long curved shape emerging from lotus petals, our modern minds might whisper light bulb before anything else. When we see a jar with a copper cylinder inside, the thought battery arrives almost uninvited. When a figure in an old drawing seems to hold something rectangular, our imagination fills in tablet or phone. These reactions are like hearing your name faintly in a crowd, even when no one has spoken it. It is the mind reaching toward the familiar. Misinterpretation, especially anchored in the present, is more common than we might think. We forget how wide the gap is between our world and theirs, between the meanings we attach to shapes and the meanings they attached. A spiral might represent the path of the sun, not a coil of wire. A branching shape could be a sacred plant, not a piece of machinery. A smooth-lined figure might be a deity or a symbol of life, not a schematic diagram. Once you notice how quickly the mind reaches for familiar forms, you begin to understand that many out-of-time objects are not time travelers, but reflections of our own perspective. As you leave the cloud sculpture behind, your eyes move to the cracked piece of ancient concrete. It looks unremarkable, but when you lean closer, you see that its texture is unusual. Denser, tougher, less crumbly than the concrete of many modern buildings. This small fragment carries a quiet story of lost knowledge, one that begins in ancient Rome. Roman concrete, created more than 2,000 years ago, has survived storms, salt water, and centuries of wear better than many contemporary mixtures. Modern engineers have spent years trying to understand how structures built by Roman hands remain stronger than some poured just decades ago. What they discovered is simple and profound. The Romans mixed volcanic ash into their concrete, creating a chemical reaction that produced durable crystals over time. They did not know the microscopic details, but through technique and tradition, they created a material that has outperformed many later attempts. This tells us something important. Not all advanced artifacts are glimpses of lost civilizations or visitors from beyond time. Sometimes they are simply the products of knowledge that was once common but then faded. Skills that disappeared as empires collapsed, trade routes shifted, or materials became scarce. Techniques rise and fall like the tides. A method known intimately by one generation might vanish entirely by the next. A tool refined by master craftsmen might become a mystery 1,000 years later, even though it was once ordinary. The same is true for navigation. Long before modern compasses and sextants, ancient Polynesian voyagers navigated vast oceans using stars, wind, waves, and the subtle bending of water around islands far beyond sight. Their maps were woven into memory and etched into the bones of small wooden sticks, tied with twine to show currents and routes. When European explorers first saw these tools, some dismissed them as decorative or ceremonial. It took generations for the world to recognise the sophistication encoded in those deceptively simple forms. Lost knowledge doesn't always vanish dramatically. Sometimes it simply drifts into silence because the next generation no longer needs it. And when we encounter its remains centuries later, we misread ordinary skill as extraordinary mystery. Now you turn toward the wooden spoon. It feels humble at first glance, until you realise it stands in for something deeper: convergent invention. When different peoples face similar needs, they often arrive at similar solutions even without ever meeting. Across continents and millennia, humans created spoons, bowls, chairs, wheels, and hinges, not because they copied one another, but because these shapes simply make sense. The world presents recurring challenges, and the human mind responds with recurring ingenuity. This idea softens many supposed anachronisms. A shape that looks modern might not be modern at all. It may be the natural outcome of physics, comfort, or practicality. A dovetail joint in ancient woodwork is not a sign of time travellers. It is simply a strong joint that anyone experimenting with carpentry could eventually discover. Patterns repeat across time because minds rhyme across time. We often think our inventions are uniquely modern, but the truth is more humble and more beautiful. People far in the past thought just as cleverly as we do today. And yet, tied into all of this is something quieter still: our emotional fascination with secret histories, a hidden civilization, an undiscovered genius, a whisper from the future. These ideas touch something deep in the imagination, something that longs for deeper meaning, for mysteries waiting under the surface of the everyday. Our love for the extraordinary does not make us foolish, it makes us human. Stories of impossible artifacts endure not because they are true, but because they reveal our yearning to connect with something larger than our own time. As you stand in this gentle gallery, surrounded by metaphors instead of machinery, you begin to see that many anachronisms arise not from the past breaking into the present, but from the present projecting onto the past. Misinterpretation grows from patterns in our minds. Lost knowledge whispers through gaps in history. Convergent invention speaks through the persistent logic of human creativity. And together, these three ideas remind us of something comforting. Even when the past feels confusing or mysterious, it is still made of human hands, human minds, and human stories, each one trying to make sense of its world, just as we try to make sense of ours. As you ease into the next gallery of our imagined museum, the lighting grows softer still, almost like the glow you might find in a quiet theatre before a show begins. But there is no stage here, no velvet curtains or rows of seats. Instead, this gentle space holds something more elusive: the stories we tell ourselves about the past, and the ways those stories shift when wonder and spectacle take the lead. This is the room where science and imagination meet, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes tangling, and often revealing as much about us as about the artifacts we study. The first display in the room is simple, a short timeline drawn not with numbers or symbols, but with soft watercolour strokes. It represents the steady, careful movement of real scientific work. Each point on the timeline is a little smudge of colour, reminding you that progress in understanding is not a series of sharp leaps, but a long blending of efforts, tiny discoveries, revised ideas, new questions, and better tools. Science in this depiction is a gentle tide, patient, deliberate, accumulating truth grain by grain the way a beach slowly gathers sand. Now, across from this quiet timeline stands another exhibit, one filled with bright posters, dramatic headlines, and splashes of exaggerated imagery. Here you see recreations of book covers and television graphics that promise the truth they don't want you to know, artifacts that break all the rules, secrets of the ancients revealed. The colours are rich, the fonts bold, and the sense of urgency almost playful. This side of the room reminds you how easily mystery can be shaped into spectacle. It is not that dramatic stories are inherently dishonest. Rather, they thrive on emotion more than evidence. They're crafted to stir excitement, to spark the thrill of discovering something world-shaking. They whisper hints that perhaps you, the viewer or reader, are about to learn something hidden, something most people never see. They invite you to feel chosen, privy to the inner workings of the universe. And that emotional pull is powerful, especially late at night when imagination drifts unguarded. Pseudo-archaeology, the term scholars use for interpretations of the past built more from speculation than from evidence, often wears this dramatic clothing. It takes small gaps in our knowledge and stretches them wide. A tool with an unknown purpose becomes a fragment of advanced technology. A carving whose meaning is unclear becomes a diagram of future innovations. A coincidence in appearance becomes proof of visitors from another time. And because these stories feel thrilling, many people remember them more easily than they remember the slow, careful explanations offered by science. But here, in the calm of our museum, the contrast becomes soothing rather than combative. There is no need to choose between curiosity and caution. Instead, we can place them side by side and let their differences illuminate the nature of our fascination. Consider again the Antikythera Mechanism, which you visited earlier in the museum. Some storytellers once claimed it was an impossible machine, far too advanced for its time, evidence of outside intervention. But when scientists examined it with patience, they found the fingerprints of Greek astronomy, mathematics, and craftsmanship. What had first appeared to be a leap across centuries turned out to be a testament to ancient brilliance, not a break in the timeline. And this is where science shows its quiet strength. It does not dim the wonder, it deepens it. It does not crush the extraordinary, it finds the extraordinary within the ordinary. When a mystery is explored carefully, it rarely becomes dull. Instead, it becomes richer, grounded in real human effort and imagination. Knowing that the Antikythera Mechanism was built by ancient hands does not make it less magical. If anything, it allows it to glow even more softly with human ingenuity. Yet humans still long for the impossible, even in the face of careful explanations. There is a part of the mind that loves the idea of time travel, not as a scientific reality, but as a way to revisit moments we wish we could change or reclaim. The thought of moving backward to fix a mistake, or forward to glimpse a better world, carries a tender emotional weight. Time travel touches the same place in us that feels nostalgia, regret, hope, and wonder. It promises a kind of freedom from the straight lines of life. Some nights, when you lie awake imagining what might have been, or wondering what tomorrow might hold, you're practicing your own quiet form of time travel. So when a story suggests that someone from the future might have left behind a device, or that an ancient artist might have drawn something impossible, it touches that same soft place in the mind, the place that believes time can bend to emotion. In this gallery, one final display waits near the exit. It shows a small lamp casting a circle of warm light on a stack of field journals from archaeological digs. The journals are filled with sketches and notes written in gentle handwriting. These pages are not dramatic. They contain no shocking revelations, just observations, measurements, reflections, and a humbling truth. The world is full of things we don't fully understand, but understanding them slowly is its own kind of beauty. As you look at the journals, you sense the transition that this session is preparing you for, the shift from how humans interpret anomalies to how the universe itself shapes time. If time travellers did exist, and if they somehow left a trace in the past, such a discovery would not only rewrite history books, it would touch the deepest foundations of physics, it would reshape our understanding of cause and effect, it would require new ways of imagining the flow of existence itself. And so, while the idea of impossible artifacts stirs delight or fear in popular imagination, science nudges us toward a different question, one that whispers instead of shouting. If time travel feels so tempting, so alluring, and so emotionally resonant, what does modern physics actually say about time? And in a universe governed by quiet, consistent laws, where might a footprint from the future even fit? As you step into the next gallery of our imagined museum, the atmosphere shifts once more, not toward artifacts or ancient puzzles this time, but towards something more abstract, more elusive, and yet deeply familiar. The walls around you seem to fade into a soft twilight glow, as if the room itself were suspended between moments. At the centre stands a single circular bench, inviting you to sit, breathe, and look around as the nature of time quietly unfolds. There are no display cases here, no bronze gears, no weathered stone. Instead, the room holds only gentle images, moving murals that ripple across the walls like reflections on water. They aren't literal diagrams. They don't need numbers or symbols. They're simply metaphors, crafted to ease you into an idea that can feel overwhelming if approached too sharply. Tonight, we are not studying time like scientists hunched over equations. We are letting time drift into view the way dawn approaches the horizon, slowly, calmly, without hurry. The first mural shows a river flowing between distant mountains. Its surface glimmers in the soft light, curling around bends, widening and narrowing as it moves. This is the river metaphor of time, common, simple, and deeply comforting. In this view, the past lies upstream, a place where the water has already passed. The future lies downstream, where the river disappears into mist, and the present is the quiet stretch of water flowing around your ankles as you stand in the shallows. This metaphor resonates easily because it mirrors our experience. Time seems to move, moments slip behind us, new ones appear ahead. But even as you watch the river, you might feel a small curiosity stirring. Does the river move, or do we move within it? Is time flowing, or are we the ones walking from one moment to the next, carrying our awareness like a lantern along the bank? The mural shifts gently, and now the walls transform into tall shelves stretching upward and outward, until they fade into soft, glowing distance. This is the library metaphor. Each book on these shelves represents a moment, every instant that has ever happened, already written, already bound. In this view, time does not flow at all. Instead, every moment exists together, like the pages of a story that someone may read in order or skip through as they please. The past is not lost. The future is not yet written. They are all already there, sitting quietly in their bindings. If the river metaphor reflects how we feel time, the library metaphor reflects how some philosophers imagine time at its deepest level. Only one page is visible at a time, and that page is what we call now. But the rest of the book is still there, waiting, patient, real in its own way. The idea can feel strange, but comforting too. It suggests that time might be more spacious than we think, that the moments that shaped us are not gone, merely shelved. The mural shifts once more, and now the room seems filled with a soft, glowing block, like a sculpture made of pure clarity. It resembles glass, though it does not reflect or refract. Instead, it seems to contain tiny sparkles of light frozen inside, each one a moment in time. This is the block metaphor, a single structure in which all moments coexist, past, present, future. They're woven into this block like stars suspended in a clear night. In this metaphor, time does not move at all. We do. Our consciousness drifts through the block, touching one moment after another, like a traveller moving through a vast landscape of events. And though the metaphor is simple, it captures an idea that quietly emerged from 20th century physics, that different observers, moving at different speeds or in different gravitational environments, do not always agree on what now means. You don't need equations to understand this. Picture two clocks, one resting on Earth, one carried by an astronaut orbiting high above. Because of the way gravity and motion affect time, softly, gently, almost imperceptibly, the astronaut's clock will tick just a little slower. It's not magic or science fiction. It's been measured many times. Time itself stretches and compresses depending on where you are and how you move. This simple truth makes the idea of one universal, shared now, difficult to sustain. If two people cannot fully agree on what now is, then perhaps now is not an absolute slice of reality, but something flexible, shaped by perspective. Staring into the glowing block, you can almost feel the implications settling around you. If time is not a river flowing in one direction, but a landscape that simply is, then the notion of past and future becomes softer, less rigid. It doesn't imply that time travel is real, or that people from distant centuries walk among us, but it does mean the idea of footprints from the future, strange though it sounds, fits more comfortably within the realm of imagination than we might expect. You sit on the circular bench, breathing slowly, letting the murmurs of these metaphors drift around you. None of them claim to be the definitive explanation. They are simply invitations, ways of touching something too vast to hold directly. Time may be a river, a book, a block, or something else entirely, but each metaphor offers a gentle doorway into the strangeness of existence. The room seems to hold its breath as you reflect on the nature of time. Whether we picture it flowing, standing still, or existing all at once, the truth remains that our experience of time is deeply personal. We feel the tug of the past in our memories. We glimpse the shimmer of the future in our hopes. And the present, the quiet moment right here, is the place where our awareness lingers like a flame sheltered from the wind. Perhaps this is why anachronisms feel so haunting. They suggest that the borders of time are thinner than we imagine, that perhaps the river is not so linear, the library not so separated, the block not so frozen, even if we have no proof of future footsteps hidden in ancient soil. The mysterious nature of time makes the idea feel softly possible. The gallery you enter next feels quieter than any other room so far. The air is still, like the hush that settles right before snowfall. The lights dim gently, revealing only a few soft images drifting across the walls, scenes that seem to repeat and echo, looping back into themselves as though time here is taking slow, deliberate breaths. This room is devoted to the puzzles that arise not from objects we can touch, but from ideas that slip through our fingers the moment we try to hold them. These are the paradoxes and loops of time, thought experiments that seem simple at first, then open into vast unsettling possibilities. A single chair sits in the centre of the room. On it rests a book, not ancient, not mysterious, just ordinary. Its cover is unmarked, its pages blank. This book becomes the starting point for one of the gentlest paradoxes in all of storytelling, a loop without a clear beginning. Imagine a person, somewhere in a quiet room decades from now, discovering this very book filled with brilliant ideas, concepts that solve problems, inspire discoveries, or shape entire fields of study. They read it, learn from it, and eventually they build a life around the insights it contains. Years pass. One evening, they find themselves holding a small device, a way, let's say, to step briefly into another time. They consider what to bring with them as a gift, or guide for their younger self, and so, naturally, they choose the book. When they step back into the past, they place it gently on a chair in a quiet room and leave. Their younger self eventually finds it. But here's the puzzle. Who wrote the book? The older self didn't write it. They only copied what was already there. The younger self didn't write it. They only received it. The book's ideas seem to exist in a perfect circle, a loop without an origin, a story in which cause and effect wrap around each other like vines growing endlessly toward one another. The book exists because it exists. It teaches because it has already taught. Its knowledge flows in a circle so complete that it becomes impossible to say where it began. This is the essence of a causal loop, a narrative shape that appears often in discussions of time travel. Not because loops are known to exist in our world, but because our imaginations reach for them naturally when we think about time bending. They are neat, elegant, and deeply strange. They ask questions without demanding answers. They suggest a kind of time where events feed into themselves, like reflections bouncing between mirrors. Another story drifts across the room, faint but clear enough to follow. You see a quiet village, centuries in the past. A battlefield lies nearby, silent now except for the wind moving through abandoned equipment. A soldier from that time bends down and finds something glinting in the grass. It is a tiny object, perhaps a locket, perhaps a polished piece of metal with markings no one recognizes. The soldier has never seen anything like it. Historians centuries later might find records of its discovery and wonder how such an object came to rest in that era. Was it dropped by a traveller? Was it carried by someone who arrived from a distant land? Was it planted, forgotten, or somehow misplaced long before its time? The mind, when meeting such a story, often leaps to the extraordinary. What if the object came from the future? What if it was carried back in a moment of temporal confusion? What if it belonged to someone who had walked not just across distance, but across time? These ideas stir something gentle in the imagination. They let us picture timelines not as straight paths, but as threads that might cross, knot, or circle. Even if we know no real artifact has ever forced scientists to consider such a loop, the very thought carries a quiet thrill. But along with these loops comes the more famous paradox, one told so often it has become almost a bedtime story for philosophers. You may have heard it in many forms, but here we can tell it softly, without naming it or binding it to a single title. Picture someone stepping backward in time, carrying knowledge of events that have already shaped their life. They decide in that misty past moment to change something important, something that directly affects their own existence. Perhaps they save someone who originally died. Perhaps they stop a major event before it happens. Perhaps they accidentally alter a path that once led to their own birth. If they succeed, then the version of themselves who stepped backward may never come to exist. But if they never exist, then they could never have stepped back in time to make the change. And so the event becomes tangled, the moment becomes foggy. The story ties itself into a knot. Physicists who study the logic of time travel purely as a mathematical possibility sometimes suggest that if time travel were ever real, the universe might quietly avoid contradictions. Events that would create a loop too tangled to sustain might simply not occur. Instead, only loops that remain consistent, like the book passed from a future self to a past self, would be allowed. It is a soft idea, not a proven truth. More of a suggestion than a rule. A way of saying that reality might prefer paths with fewer fractures, fewer impossibilities, fewer broken threads. But even as a hypothetical, it whispers something intriguing, that an object with no clear origin is not logically impossible. It is simply strange, unsettling, fascinating. And that brings us back to anachronisms, not because any known artifact truly appears to have emerged from a loop, but because the thought of such a thing touches something deep in us. When we hear of an object that seems too advanced, too unusual, too early, part of our mind wonders whether it might be one of these loop-born things, a piece of the future gently resting in the past, without a clear beginning or end. Sitting in the calm glow of this gallery, watching the looping images drift across the walls, you may notice that these paradoxes don't demand belief. They don't insist that time travel is real, or that history is full of travellers in disguise. They simply offer a quiet way to stretch the imagination, an opportunity to consider how vast, how strange, how beautifully intricate the idea of time can be. The next gallery in our imagined museum feels almost weightless, as though the walls themselves were made of soft air. The floor glows faintly underfoot, and the ceiling seems to fade upward into a gentle haze, like early dawn lifting over a calm sea. This is the space where we step carefully into the territory of modern physics, not through equations or symbols, not through sharp diagrams or complicated terms, but through the same kind of slow, steady imagery that has guided us through every other room. Here, instead of artifacts, we encounter ideas, quiet, patient, and shaped into forms the mind can rest upon. As you move deeper into the room, a single image arises on the wall, a vast sheet of fabric stretched across a frame. The fabric droops gently in places, lifted in others, its surface smooth but subtly uneven. This is one of the gentlest metaphors for space and time, a stretchy cloth that responds to the presence of anything placed upon it. A star presses down, creating a valley. A planet rolls around that valley, circling its rim. A tiny moon makes the faintest of impressions as it passes. No symbols are needed to understand this. The fabric simply shows that space and time bend in response to mass and motion, something you can imagine with your fingertips. From this soft image, a small scene begins to unfold. Picture an astronaut drifting through the quiet dark around Earth, moving swiftly in orbit. Deep below them, someone stands on the surface of the planet, feet planted solidly on the ground. Their worlds feel different, and in the language of physics, their time is slightly different too. The astronaut's clock runs a little slower than the clock of the person below. Not by minutes or hours, just a whisper of difference, so slight it would take delicate instruments to measure. But that whisper of difference is real. It is one of the first signs that time itself is not rigid. It stretches and relaxes depending on where you are and how you move, much like the fabric in the image. No formulas are needed to feel this strangeness. It is enough to imagine two travellers comparing notes after a long journey, one returning from the curve of the earth, the other staying home. Their clocks disagree by a tiny margin, a reminder that time behaves like something alive rather than mechanical. As you move farther along the glowing floor, the next image appears. Two distant hills with a soft tunnel connecting them. This is a way to imagine wormholes, tunnels that might, in theory, shorten the paths through space and time. The idea is simple enough. Instead of walking over the hills, you slip through the tunnel. Scientists discovered this possibility while studying the mathematics of curved space, but whether nature builds such tunnels, or whether they can remain open long enough for anything to pass through, is still completely unknown. They remain ideas, delicate and fascinating like seeds that may never sprout, but are still worth holding in the palm of your hand. Some thinkers imagine that if such tunnels could exist, they might allow two distant moments in time to brush gently against each other, not in a dramatic flash of light or a whirl of machinery, but as a quiet joining of two pages in the book of time. But this remains speculation, a soft thought rather than a proven doorway. Moving toward the centre of the room, another image slowly forms. This one shows a traveller moving quickly along a long, bright path. The faster they move, the more the scenery around them seems to stretch and the more slowly their internal clock seems to tick. Again, no numbers are needed. It is simply the suggestion that time's rhythm changes when speed approaches the limits of the universe. In the real world, this is not something humans experience dramatically, but tiny particles in laboratories behave exactly this way. They live longer when they move faster, as though time grants them an extended breath. These gentle distortions, measured in small experiments and quiet observations, hint that moving into the future more quickly is not only possible but already built into the structure of reality. Time travel forward, through speed or deep gravity, is not fiction. It is a natural consequence of the way time folds and flutters around mass and motion. But stepping backward, that is different. The walls grow darker now, not ominous but contemplative, like drifting into deeper water. To move backward in time would require bending the fabric so intensely that it loops into itself, or shaping tunnels that nature may not permit. The more physicists study these possibilities, the more it appears that while the universe allows tiny glimpses of time's flexibility, it guards the past with quiet firmness. If someone could easily travel to the past, the smallest action might ripple outward endlessly. A single word spoken to the wrong person, a single seed planted at the wrong moment, a single object introduced accidentally, each could alter the flow of history in ways so tangled that reality might struggle to remain consistent. And so, in many theoretical models, the universe simply resists the kinds of loops that would tear its structure apart. It doesn't forbid imagination, it doesn't forbid stories, but it gently discourages contradictions, the way a river discourages currents that flow against themselves. Some researchers propose that only self-consistent loops, events that cause themselves without breaking anything, could ever survive. A notebook passed from future to past might be allowed. A catastrophic contradiction might quietly dissolve before it can form. In this soft light, you realize something important. No artifact ever uncovered, no device ever found, has forced scientists to consider travelers from the future. The Baghdad Battery, the Antikythera Mechanism, the Piri Reis Map, the Rustless Pillar, the desert lines, they are wondrous, but they belong to the hands of their own time. The mysteries they hold arise from human creativity, not temporal visitors. If a true future artifact were discovered, something made with materials unknown to our era, containing knowledge no ancient mind could have imagined, it would not merely rewrite history, it would rewrite physics, it would challenge our models of how time behaves, it would force us to rethink the shape of cause and effect, the flow of existence, the relationship between past, present, and future. But perhaps the most intriguing realization arrives as the lights dim even further, revealing a final small doorway at the back of the room. Beyond it lies not cosmic time, but personal time. Not the vast structure of the universe, but the intimate patterns of memory and imagination. And suddenly, you sense the next transition forming like a whisper. Even if the universe keeps its deeper secrets locked within its fabric, there is one kind of time travel you already practice every day inside your own mind. As you pass through the doorway at the back of the physics gallery, the museum around you seems to exhale. The air grows warmer, softer, like stepping into a room lit only by a bedside lamp. The walls here do not hold artifacts from the ancient world or diagrams of cosmic ideas. Instead, they hold faint, shifting images, moments from a life. A child running through a courtyard, a kitchen bathed in late afternoon light, a street corner where rain has just begun to fall. None of these scenes are labelled, none have dates, and yet you know them instantly. They feel like memories, not yours, not mine, but memories from someone, drifting gently through the space like leaves carried by a breeze. This gallery is devoted to a different kind of time travel, not one involving wormholes or advanced machines, but the quiet, everyday form we practice without noticing, the time travel of the mind. When you close your eyes at night and drift into thought, your mind moves effortlessly across years. One moment you might be lying in your present bed, and the next you're back in your childhood room, watching dust shimmer in the sunlight. There is no machine humming, no countdown, no glowing portal, just the simple, natural shift of attention. You revisit moments that no longer exist anywhere except inside you. You walk through them, feel them, breathe their air. In these moments, the boundary between past and present softens like mist. Scientists sometimes call this mental time travel, but that phrase can sound more complicated than it is. Really, it means something simple. Your mind can tell stories about where you've been and stories about where you might go. It can replay scenes like watching a familiar film. It can imagine future moments, like watching a trailer for a movie that hasn't been made yet. And sometimes, more often than you realise, it mixes them. To your mind, time is not a straight line. It's more like a quilt, pulled and folded and rearranged as memory and imagination drift. You might remember your old house, but picture it with the furniture you bought years later. You might recall a conversation, but fill in details that weren't actually there. In one memory, the wallpaper might be the pattern from your later apartment. In another, a person's voice might sound older or younger than they truly were. These are inner anachronisms, objects or details appearing in the wrong time, not in history, but in the landscapes of your own mind. And they happen gently without your noticing. Imagine remembering a childhood birthday. You see the cake, the candles, the smiles. But when you look closely, you realise your adult coffee mug is on the table, something that couldn't possibly have been there. Your memory stitched it in without asking, borrowing a shape from your present life to fill a small gap in the past. Or perhaps you remember a walk you took years ago. The trees look right. The sky feels right. But the backpack you picture yourself wearing is one you bought much later. Your mind replaces missing details with familiar ones, not because it wants to deceive you, but because it wants your memories to feel whole. This is not a flaw. It is simply the way the mind works. Memory is not a perfect recording. It is more like a painting touched and retouched over time. Each recolouring is done with gentle intention, to make sense of what remains, to fill in the details that have faded, to help you carry your life story in a way that feels continuous rather than broken. And imagination works the same way. When you picture the future, you use pieces from your past. If you imagine yourself visiting a new city, the details you fill in, the benches, the storefronts, the way the evening light hits the pavement, come from cities you've already known. Your mind blends what was with what might be, creating a future scene with the texture of memory. In this sense, the most persistent time traveller you will ever meet is not someone stepping out of a machine with sparks flying. It is you. You travel backward and forward dozens of times each day. You recall a moment while cooking dinner. You imagine a conversation while walking to work. You revisit an old error and rehearse the apology you wish you'd made. You replay a kindness and feel its warmth again. Your mind slips across the boundary of time as easily as a candle flame flickers when someone walks by. Some of these inner anachronisms carry emotion. A memory of someone you've lost may appear softened, lit more warmly than it truly was. A childhood fear may seem smaller now, as though you've placed your adult understanding inside the memory. These shifts do not erase the past, they help you carry it with gentleness. Memories reshape themselves, not to deceive, but to heal, to comfort, to make the weight of time bearable. As you sit quietly in this gallery surrounded by drifting scenes, you may begin to realise that the human mind contains its own museum, exhibits arranged not by strict chronology but by meaning. A moment from age 5 may sit beside a moment from last week because they share a feeling, a sensory detail. Rain on leaves, the scent of cinnamon, the creak of old floors may open a door to a time you had forgotten. And when you step through that door, you feel the moment again, not as a historian examining a fact, but as a traveller returning to a place that still lives in you. Even if the physical world rarely shows us objects that appear from the wrong time, our inner world is full of them. We carry childhood fears into adulthood. We bring adult worries into memories of childhood. We mix hope and nostalgia, regret and possibility, past and future. These small time crossings are part of what makes us human. You may wonder what this has to do with anachronisms, the kind we explored earlier in the museum. The truth is that our fascination with objects from the wrong time comes from the same instinct that reshapes our memories, a longing for continuity, a desire to feel connected to something larger than the moment we currently inhabit. If our minds can blend timelines inside us, perhaps we find comfort imagining that the world itself might be woven from threads that cross unexpectedly. But here in this gallery, the emphasis is not on cosmic puzzles. It is on you, your memories, your inner loops, your gentle crossings between moments. And as you watch the shifting images fade and reappear on the walls, you may feel a quiet truth settling in your chest. Even if the universe never allows us to step physically into the past or future, we already carry entire timelines within us. The gallery that follows is dimmer than the others, almost like the hush that settles over a landscape right before dawn. The lights along the floor glow softly, guiding your steps in a slow curve. You sense immediately that this room is different, not because of what it contains, but because of what it invites you to imagine. There are no ancient tools here, no carvings or maps. Instead, the walls hold only faint silhouettes, shapes that appear, fade and reappear, as though they belong to moments not quite rooted in any single time. This is the gallery of what if. Not the what if of fear or thrill, but the softer kind. The kind you whisper to yourself when you're alone with your thoughts, wondering how life might have unfolded differently. Here, the museum gives you space to explore a gentle question. What if one artifact truly came from the future? What then? The room's first image is an empty pedestal illuminated by a quiet spotlight. It holds nothing, yet you can feel the weight of something imagined. Something not real, not found, not recognized by any historian. The pedestal becomes a stage for the mind. So you let yourself picture it. A small object resting there, unmistakably beyond its era. Perhaps a piece of metal too pure to be ancient. Perhaps a material unknown to chemistry. Perhaps a mechanism no ancient toolmaker could replicate. Not myth, not hoax, but undeniably genuine. And then the room asks the next question, softly, without pushing. If such an object were real, what would happen to our understanding of the past? Slowly, the silhouettes on the wall shift into scenes of ancient cities, dusty roads, clay houses, markets humming with voices. You imagine someone from that world, a potter, a shepherd, a navigator, finding the object. They lift it, examine it, wonder at it. They cannot name its purpose. They cannot read its markings. But they sense instinctively that it comes from a place far beyond their world. Would they hide it? Cherish it? Fear it? If the object contained knowledge, say, a fragment of writing or a symbol, they might incorporate it into their own stories. A new myth, a new ritual, a new belief that ripples quietly through generations, and, centuries later, archaeologists might find those stories carved into stone, unaware that their origin lay not in ancient imagination, but in the quiet arrival of something entirely out of place. On one wall, a sequence of silhouettes shows how a simple idea can ripple through time. A tool or symbol spreads from one generation to the next, becoming slowly absorbed into culture. Not because someone meant to change the world, but because small things often travel farther than their makers intended. This is how real history works. Gently, unpredictably, through everyday moments. The museum now invites you to imagine the next layer of the what if, the butterfly effect, explained not with formulas or symbols, but with a simple scene. A child in an ancient village finds the object. They keep it as a charm. One day they show it to someone older. That person forms a theory about what it means. That theory influences a decision. That decision influences a trade route. The trade route influences contact between distant cultures. And hundreds of years later, a distant kingdom rises or falls slightly differently because of a single moment. because a small, strange artifact glinted on the ground one morning long ago. The beauty of the butterfly effect lies not in fear, but in humility. It reminds us that tiny events can matter, even if we never see their consequences. You don't need calculations to understand this. You only need to remember a moment in your own life, a conversation, a choice, a coincidence that quietly shaped the years that followed. Now the room shifts again, its soft silhouettes forming something more dramatic, a loop gently glowing. The loop represents a deeper question. If the artifact truly came from the future, does history still unfold freely? Or does the loop mean the past was always meant to contain that object? Is the discovery part of a story already woven into time? You don't need complex physics to feel the strangeness of this idea. Picture someone in the distant future sending a small device backward. It lands in the past. That moment shapes a culture. That culture evolves. That evolution influences the future. And eventually, the person who sends the object grows up in a world shaped by the very artifact they sent. The loop closes softly, like a circle drawn in sand. The room does not suggest this is true. It merely lets you feel how gentle and haunting the idea can be. Next, the silhouettes shift into something quieter. Scenes of ancient workshops, libraries, and observatories. The museum invites you to imagine how such an artifact could inspire future discoveries, even without time loops. A grain of unknown metal might push a scholar to ask new questions. A strange symbol might inspire a generation of thinkers. Even the dream of contact with something extraordinary could spark an entire era of creativity. In reality, no artifact from the future has ever been found. None have forced scientists to rewrite the laws of physics. But the dream of such objects, of footprints left by tomorrow, can still influence the present. It can lead people to study the past more deeply, to question assumptions, to look at familiar objects with new eyes. The room grows even quieter now, as a final image appears on the far wall. It shows two paths branching outward from a single point. One represents the world we know. The other represents a world shaped subtly by a single difference. The museum whispers a soft question. If you could send something small into the past, a tool, a warning, a cure, would you? It doesn't ask you to answer. It simply lets the question rest in the air, like a feather that hasn't yet decided where to land. And then the room offers its last gentle reminder that the most powerful future footprints are not strange artifacts or paradoxes, but ideas. Every generation sends its thoughts, discoveries, and stories forward in time. Every new way of seeing the world becomes a footprint that shapes the next century. You don't need a time machine to influence the future. Every choice you make, every kindness, every insight, every question, ripple outward in ways you may never see. The final gallery of this imagined museum feels like the softest room of all. The air carries a warmth that resembles the last light of evening, the kind that drapes itself gently across old wooden floors. The walls have no displays now, no artifacts, no diagrams, no shifting silhouettes. Instead, they glow with a faint amber tone, like pages of a long-loved book. After wandering through deserts and oceans, through riddles of metal and puzzles of time, you find yourself in a space meant not for discovery, but for rest. This room is here to help you gather everything you've seen, not with urgency, but with the same calm rhythm that a tide uses to gather shells along a shore. You began this journey chasing mysteries, objects that seem to defy history, stories whispered from the edges of archaeology, ideas that stretched imagination beyond the usual horizon. You lingered beside clay jars that resembled batteries, gazed at a corroded machine that mapped the sky, traced lines carved into desert earth, and stood before ancient maps that seemed to know too much. Each object held its own question, its own quiet invitation. And then, as the museum guided you deeper, you moved beyond artifacts into the landscape of interpretation. You learned how easily the mind projects the familiar onto the unfamiliar, how we see light bulbs in lotus flowers, rockets in ancient carvings, or forgotten technologies in simple tools. You discovered that lost knowledge can feel like magic when rediscovered, and that sometimes different cultures simply invent similar things, because human needs rhyme across centuries. From there, you drifted into rooms that explored our fascination with the impossible. You saw how dramatic stories tug at our yearning to feel, special to believe we've uncovered a secret thread no one else has followed. But you also saw the quiet dignity of real scientific work, its patience, its humility, its respect for the unknown. And then, as if stepping through a doorway woven from starlight, you found yourself exploring time itself. A river, a library, a block of glass. 3 different ways of envisioning the same elusive thing. Each metaphor softened time's strangeness into something your mind could hold gently. You learned how clocks can disagree without argument, how motion and gravity stretch time's rhythm, how the universe's laws allow you to drift forward in time faster simply by moving through it differently. And then came the paradoxes, stories of loops without beginnings, books that write themselves by never being written, timelines that fold like petals meeting in the dark. Not because such things exist in our world, but because they whisper possibilities that stretch imagination without breaking it. From there, the museum guided you back inward, into your own mind. You saw how memory revises itself, how imagination borrows from yesterday to build tomorrow, how your inner world creates its own soft anachronisms, objects from the wrong era appearing in the landscapes of recollection or daydream. You realized that even if the universe doesn't easily allow time travel, your mind moves freely across your lifetime every day. And in the last gallery, you wandered through the gentle what if of future footprints left in the past. You felt how a single object, truly from another time, could ripple through an ancient world. How it might shape culture quietly. How it might fold itself into myths. How it could alter the course of history in ways too delicate to measure. You explored questions that never demand answers, like whether helping the past would cause harm, whether a loop might always have been part of time's story, whether even imagining these possibilities shapes the present in subtle ways. And now you stand here, in this final amber-lit space, where the Museum of Time gently returns the focus to you. You do not need to be a traveller from the future to leave a footprint in time. You are already doing it. Every choice you make, every kindness you offer, every question you ask, every connection you nurture, these things ripple outward just as surely as any artifact might ripple across centuries. They shape stories in ways you may never witness. They shift the paths of other lives quietly, the way a small stone shifts the direction of flowing water. Perhaps in this moment, the past and the future feel closer than they usually do, not because anything supernatural has happened, but because you've taken the time to wander through history with curiosity and patience. That act alone places you in a long line of seekers, people who have always tried to understand where they stand in the vast fabric of existence. You might think of someone in the future stumbling upon something you made, a journal, a message, a thread of digital memory, and wondering what kind of life you lived. You might think of someone you will never meet whose life will be touched, gently and anonymously, by a decision you make tomorrow. You might think of your own childhood self and how often you step back into those early moments just by remembering them. In this sense, you too are an artifact, an evolving one, carrying echoes of your past selves while shaping the future paths of others. And perhaps that is the softest truth the museum has offered all evening. Time is not only something that happens to you, it is something you shape, simply by living. The final light in the room dims slightly, leaving only a warm glow, as though the museum is inviting you to rest. You might choose, if you feel comfortable, to share in the comments the anachronism that puzzled you most, or a moment from your own life that feels like it belongs to another time. Not as a question needing an answer, but as a way of leaving your own footprint in this quiet exploration. And now, with the halls behind you growing still, the museum closes its doors softly, yet never completely. You can return here any time your thoughts drift, or whenever you need a gentle place to sit with the mysteries of time,